What's going on, guys? Hope you're all doing well. Now for today's video, I wanted to give you another one of those gigantic videos that go over loads of information on the Jurassic Park franchise entirely. This time we're going to be going over some of the unmade movie scripts and drafts from the Jurassic Park sequels that never really got made. I've been really enjoying going back to older stuff on the channel and doing these big comprehensive videos for you guys, whether it be about dinosaur lore, Site B, Isla Nublar, or even action sequences that were abandoned. But this one was super fun to look back on just because of how long it spans the entire franchise. Once again, thank you guys for even clicking on the video. As always, you know that if you leave me a like, it'll help the channel grow. I would love to hear your thoughts on everything in the comments down below for the future, and subscribe if you want to see more. Now, obviously, the bulk of today's video is going to be on the Jurassic Park sequels, but we start off actually before the 1993 film with a couple of wild drafts of a movie that we should all be super familiar with.
Jurassic Park.
David Koepp's final draft has very little to do with the original version done by the author of the book himself. Now, in all honesty, this is one of the easiest movies on this list to explain because Crichton's script for the movie Jurassic Park was pretty identical to the novel that he'd written. It would have started out with the compy attacking the little girl, and it would have met each major plot point that isn't currently in the final movie, like Grant killing the raptors by poisoning the eggs in the hatchery, and Timmy seeing the raptors stow away on the cargo boat. Where it does differ from the novel, though, is pretty interesting, because in Crichton's screen adaptation, he actually kills John Hammond in a very different way. A badly injured John was supposed to start up the introduction video in an effort to save his grandchildren from the raptors that were hunting them during a scene. Hearing this distraction and leaving the kids alone, the raptors would slam open the door and tear into Hammond while Lex and Tim ran to safety. All the while, his own voice can be heard speaking out from the recording during his death, saying,
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
I'm pretty sure that very few of you have ever heard of this older draft of the original Jurassic Park, but don't worry, I'll fill you all in on this pretty different take in the movie. So Malia Scotch-Marmo was the writer on the film that Spielberg did directly before Jurassic Park, 1991's Hook. Marmo's approach to Jurassic Park was littered with a lot of the kind of light comedy that you could expect to find in that Robin Williams Peter Pan story, but it also had its fair share of pretty crazy ideas as well. For starters, in this movie, the jungles on Isla Nublar are said to be growing at such an incredibly fast rate that Robert Muldoon and the park workers have to use flamethrowers in order to burn the plant matter away from overtaking the visitor center. The raptor pen in this movie is also described as being a hole in the ground with an electric mesh over the top. No joke, it's described in a way that's ridiculously similar to what the Titans were being held prisoner in during 1997's Hercules. Also, Ian Malcolm was deleted from this entire script, and the lawyer Donald Gennaro would have taken his place instead. Possibly the most interesting thing about this draft is its dedication to characterizing the park and Hammond himself. You see, the Jurassic Park story has always been talked about as a sort of representation for the Garden of Eden. It's a beautiful place with a ton of creatures that are really cool, but as soon as you pick the forbidden fruit, everything goes to hell and you get kicked out, never allowed to go back again. The original movie doesn't really play this stuff up that much, and you have to kind of dig deep to find it. Oddly enough, this version would have touched upon that stuff considerably, with Hammond even calling Isla Nublar his Garden of Eden several times in the script. And there's even a weird moment where they describe light emanating behind him like he's supposed to be God. This was going to culminate with Hammond staying behind while everyone else got in the chopper and left. Dr. Grant would beg Hammond to come with them, but John would simply say that all of them are being too negative and that his Eden was perfectly fine. Once they leave, Hammond falls down a sloping hill and drops face first into a tiny puddle where he evidently suffocates to death. The film would then close with a mosquito landing on his hand and sucking his blood just as the little insects had done to all the dinosaurs that he'd brought back to life. If you haven't read this draft of the original movie, I'd highly suggest doing so for just how insanely different it is from the version we all know and love. Just be prepared for all the stuff I told you about in this little synopsis. The story that we will be going over today was actually the very first adaptation of Michael Crichton's sequel book, The Lost World, into a Hollywood script from David Koepp and Steven Spielberg. But as many of you know, the Lost World movie that we actually got in 1997 is wildly different from the Lost World book that was released in 1995. This story would be David Koepp's first translation of the source material. However, even back then, there was a lot of stuff that was drastically altered in the script. As such, there is no San Diego ending, no group of hunters at all, no Roland Timbo, no Peter Ludlow, and no little girl getting attacked by compies. To put it simply, the outline story that we're going to be going over today is about as similar to the Lost World movie as that movie is to the book that it's based on. In other words, yeah, it's totally different. So first things first, let's talk about some dinosaurs. Now, back when this movie was getting made, believe it or not, a popular fan website known as Dan's Lost World page was actually leaking a ton of rumors about the production of the second film to the public, and believe it or not, a few of them actually did happen to be true. Some of the dinosaurs that they had gotten wind of appearing in the film, like Dilophosaurus or Pteranodon, would of course get cut or downsized, but the mention of a, quote, camouflaging dinosaur actually was something that was outlined and planned to appear in this movie. Now, interestingly, in the script outline, it's never explicitly made clear what kind of dinosaur this is, but rumor has it at the time that the Carnotaurus, which had the camouflage ability in Michael Crichton's book, would actually have gotten swapped out for an Allosaurus in the movie, which I do find to be a pretty cool idea that I honestly wish they went with. Another thing that Dan's Lost World page got right about the second film early on would have been the inclusion of a human character by the name of Judson. And how they got a hold of that info, I have absolutely no idea, but originally, this was actually going to be the main antagonist of the movie, who, get this, was not affiliated with InGen at all, and was actually a mercenary sent by Biosyn, which, in case any of you didn't know, this is the rival genetics company that Dodson was working under in the original Jurassic Park. These are the guys that paid Nedry to smuggle away dinosaur embryos, and in this story, they went back to finish the job. Now, for some reason at the time of production for the film, fans were under the impression that Jerry O'Connell would have been in talks to play this character. While not in the final release, this actor did manage to show up in another 1997 movie called Scream 2. So yeah, when I heard that, it actually kind of surprised me that the fans had heard rumors of him appearing in JP2 way back when. Now for the actual story. So what I'm going to do now is run through the entire outline that David Koepp wrote up for this version of The Lost World and give you a synopsis of what Steven Spielberg and company were planning back in the day for the second movie. This is all stuff that's coming around circa 1995 and possibly way before even New Year's of '96. So without further ado, this was the first official outline for JP2. The film would open on Isla Nublar, where several carcasses of dinosaurs would be set on fire by InGen. Part of the visitor center is in the process of burning down, and while this is all happening, an airplane sputters about overhead. It's actually shutting down mid-air as it's now out of gas, and as the pilot loses control of his aircraft, it crashes onto a nearby island, Isla Sorna. Meanwhile, in New York, a dying John Hammond tells Ian Malcolm about Site B. Agents of Biosyn, but not Lewis Dodson, begin to trail Malcolm, and even watch him outside of Hammond's apartment. They suspect that there's another place to get embryos or even eggs of dinosaurs. Later on, Ian Malcolm gets help from Kelly and Arby, his university students, in locating Site B. This leads Malcolm to charter a boat with Arby, Kelly, Eddie Carr, and Dr. Thorne all joining in on the trek to the island. The adults go out and explore several abandoned facilities on Isla Sorna, like the worker village and the lab. The kids stay behind in the trailers, but actually manage to save the adults after noticing an approaching Tyrannosaur on the trailer monitors, and notifying everyone of the danger headed their way. Meanwhile, Dr. Sarah Harding hooks up with the bad guys, led by Biosyn operative Jetson, who later throws her overboard in an attempt to kill her. But of course, just like the book, she survives. Jetson then leads the other Biosyn operatives on an egg hunt. They want, quote, good mother eggs for the company. Malcolm, Thorne, and Eddie soon find Richard Levine, who was in the aircraft that we saw earlier. But when they get to the crash site, the airplane pilot they find dead, and their vehicle short circuits on the way back. Chaos is beginning to start. This is where Jetson and his men disturb the T-Rex nest and attempt to steal eggs. 2 of his men die, but Jetson gets away, only to be knocked unconscious and alone soon after. Ian Malcolm and Eddie Carr ride motorcycles over to this disturbance that they had heard earlier and run into Sarah Harding, who Dr. Malcolm has to save from some Triceratops. Eddie Carr decides to bring an injured baby T-Rex back to their RV, while everyone else files into the high hide for safety. At nightfall, the Rex parents come looking for their infant and pretty much push the trailers over the cliff, just like what happens in the final movie. Only this time, instead of Eddie Carr getting killed, it's Dr. Thorne instead. While hiding in the air, velociraptors begin to attack the high-hide. Eddie falls out and gets killed, and Arby falls too, but gets dragged away while he's stuck in a predator cage. Sarah and Malcolm use a motorcycle to get back to the hide, and then go after one of the velociraptors who has the key to Arby's cage stuck to it. After saving Arby, the group is chased away by 12 raptors before going back to the lab. While inside of this building, they manage to see some camouflaging dinosaurs stalking about the place at night. At dawn, Jetson is attacked and apparently killed by compies, while the remaining group in the lab is attacked by raptors. They use a special paralyzing gas to get away, and after this, what's left of the team makes their way to the river, where they try to sneak past the 2 T-Rexes who are now sleeping. They find a boat and quickly head out of the area, but while they try to escape, the Tyrannosaurs wake up and begin to follow them down the river, one in the water and the other one running on the shore. After their chase, Malcolm, Sarah, Levine, Kelly, and Arby then go over a waterfall and escape by getting poured out into the open ocean, ending their trip to the Lost World and keeping them away from the dinosaurs indefinitely. So I told you that was different. Now, what I find to be really interesting about this entire outline for the second Jurassic Park movie is that it basically overhauls everything that ended up happening in the second film, and it incorporates some of the stuff that we've heard is going to play out in the 6th movie, which is yet to even be released, Jurassic World Dominion. Now, the reason I say this would have changed everything is because had this movie come out in the 90s, this just would have altered the entire trajectory of the further sequels that would have come out in years to come. Starting from the Lost World movie, InGen was, from there going forward, elevated from just a neutral genetics company to being the, quote, villains of the Jurassic franchise. They weren't like that in the first film. We see this transition with characters like Peter Ludlow in the second movie. We see this with Vic Hoskins in Jurassic World, and of course, Dr. Wu is still creating clones in Fallen Kingdom. Now, in the actual timeline of the film universe, Biosyn wouldn't show back up until Dodson's return in the 6th movie, which hasn't even come out yet. But way back then in the 90s, Kep and Spielberg were actually thinking about using this rival company way sooner than what eventually wound up happening. Of course, it's also obvious that we would have gotten a camouflaging dinosaur about 20 years before the release of Jurassic World, and we also would never have seen any dinosaur in the city action back in 1997. All in all, the decision to use Biosyn instead of InGen as the antagonists and the subsequent events that play out in the script would have changed how things went forward quite a bit for this franchise. There's no telling what JP3 or really anything would have looked like after this at all had they gone with this story. Basically, this was a very close adaptation of Michael Crichton's book, and that means that it is obviously radically different from what went down in Steven Spielberg's sequel. Some elements of this early Lost World outline actually happen to include ideas that were also taken from the first novel, such as Alan Grant's river raft chase while he's trying to get the kids to safety away from the T-Rex. Only this time, they put both Rexes from the Lost World in that scene for added impact. Over time, the Lost World scripts would radically change, and the character of Jetson would eventually turn into Dr. Judson, who was then envisioned as the Gatherer's personal paleontologist, opposite to Dr. Robert Burke, who was in league with the Hunters from InGen. Originally, this guy was supposed to have a lot of scientific dialogue, sparring with his counterpart on dinosaur behaviors, and he was actually supposed to die during that whole raptor attack on the worker village that is still in the final film. But for some reason, all of his lines were given to Sarah Harding instead, once they chose to make that character both an animal behaviorist and a paleontologist in the film. Now, when it comes to the bridge in between this old script outline and the several rewrites David Koepp would do later on, I want to talk about that in more detail soon, but Alan Grant and Ellie Sattler were also rumored to be showing up in the second film, but this information would soon come out as false closer to the movie's release, with Laura Dern even telling audiences that she was, quote, a little sad not to be back for this one. I know that they did plan on having at least one scene where Alan Grant would be drinking alone at a bar, clearly affected on a PTSD level from what had happened in the first Jurassic Park, and he would basically try to convince Malcolm not to go back to any dinosaur-infested island ever again. But this was all altered as things changed down the line. Anyways, guys, what do all of you think about this early version of the second movie? How do you think audiences would have received it, and how would this have changed the Jurassic Park franchise if they'd made this instead of the 1997 version of The Lost World? Keep in mind that at the time of release, the second Jurassic Park film caught a lot of flack from critics and audiences on not only being so different from the book, but also for some of its writing and how logic worked in the movie and its plot holes and etc, etc. I definitely think this version would probably have been better received on that end, but I still think the lack of Alan and Ellie was a bigger issue on a character level for a trilogy for fans and audiences of the first movie than what a lot of people probably think it was or even want to admit. But hey, I still love The Lost World Jurassic Park. It's my favorite out of the whole franchise, even though I recognize its flaws. This version is kind of like the Resident Evil 1.5 of the old school Jurassic series. But anyways, I've gone on long enough. Early on in the Lost World's development, the Corinthosaurus was actually going to be the first dinosaur that we see on screen, and it was going to be dead. And yes. I'm sure some of you guys will have heard before in the past about the opening with the fishing net, where they were going to pull a dinosaur. A lot of people for a long time thought it was going to be a dead Parasaurolophus because Stan Winston made that Parasaurolophus for the movie, but originally it was supposed to be a Corinthosaurus. And the reason this is so interesting is because, so when they find the body of the Corinthosaurus, immediately Peter Ludlow learns this, and he goes into this board meeting to talk with all the other members of InGen, and, you know, they flash a whole bunch of dinosaur shapes on the computers that they're around with a photograph of this dead dinosaur that's been unearthed, and an InGen woman that works at the company identifies it by saying the following: Corinthosaurus, version 3.09, 9 units generated from March to October of 1989, and 4 reached maturity. That's big already, so that tells us that in this early version of the movie, there was Corinthosaurs on the island, at least 4 of them, and this was version 3.09, which is a big deal because way before Jurassic World, they're talking about different versions of the dinosaurs now, and there's a lot of stuff to unpack here, but this would have been a really cool opening. I mean, what do you think about it, man?
I'm very interested, and Ludlow said after that, wow, we didn't know about the Site B and haven't hide us. We need to find this place and we need to capture the asset. That scene was so cool, and Corintosaurus' roar is bigger than our minds. Well, I'm very pleased.
Yeah, it's a much bigger role. It's a big surprise, and I had talked about this with Jack actually for a while about how I had heard rumors of, you know, Peter Ludlow looking for Site B because it was a secret, and I always thought that was kind of silly. I was like, how do you keep an island a secret? But when you read the script, it makes a lot of sense, and everyone at InGen is surprised. They're like, wow, it's 625 miles south to southwest of Costa Rica, and they're looking on a map and they're trying to figure out where it is, and Peter Ludlow says, wow, John Hammond was smart. This is far enough away that no one would find it, but close enough that he could transport them in a day. And there had been rumors of a Site B in the company for a while, but nobody believed it because it was just such a crazy idea that John Hammond had a whole other dinosaur island where he bred all the dinosaurs before shipping them to Nublar. But in the script they go over that Hammond kept everything quiet by paying all of the construction workers in cash, so there was no trail back that they could trace to computers, and it was very interesting. This is a very fun version of events that we never really got to see, and the fact that Peter Ludlow had to do some detective work after finding this dinosaur carcass was pretty cool, man. I really like this script. I didn't expect to, but I was reading through it and I was like, this is so different. This would have changed like everything.
Because it feels like mystery, like a King Kong or kind of adventure movies.
Yeah, you know what? That's a good point. It does kind of feel like Peter Jackson's King Kong from 2005, where you don't really know what's out there, and you know you hear the rumors of something has survived, and eventually you find out that it is true because in the actual movie, they just start with the little girl getting attacked by the compies. And I mean, we all know, you know, there's more dinosaurs out there, but, you know, this was very different. Okay, well, in the final movie, we see that the T-Rex is able to smell the blood from its baby on Sarah's jacket. Well, in one of the early scripts, Dr. Burke, who was the opposite of Dr. Jetson, he actually finds a dinosaur egg, and he decides to cook it at night, which...
What?
Yes, it's very silly. He's cooking the dinosaur egg, right? And Roland Timbo is like, "What are you doing? That's crazy. They're gonna smell." And of course, that's what leads the T-Rex to like come attack them. But
oh my god,
that's so dumb, isn't it? That's
even he's a paleontologist. He know about the dinosaurs.
I know, right? Everybody complains about Sarah knowing better from her shirt, but this guy's cooking a dinosaur egg like on the island. It's so silly.
Wow.
Yeah, it would have been. I'm glad they went with the blood on the shirt after reading through that, because that's as weird and dumb as that is. I was telling you about this before we started recording, but there's another version of the script where the gatherers were also capturing dinosaurs. It wasn't just the hunters. And yes. They had in their tent a whole bunch of compies. And, you know, the compies started to, you know, chirp really suddenly and freak out. And Sarah explained this to Kelly, that they only do this when they're spooked. And what ended up happening was, you know, the T-Rex eventually sticks its head through the tent, and there's this great scene where they talk about all of the compies suddenly shut up because they're like, oh, there's a predator. They instinctively, they just get very quiet. And the way that Sarah gets them all out of this situation is she slowly opens the cages of all the compies, and then the compies start to like race out and scramble all around the ground and cower underneath, and the T-Rex then like is looking at all these compies scurry out from the tent, and it picks its head up, and when it does, it rips the tent out of the ground. You know, that's where the whole attack starts. But that would have been such a cool little moment to see the... I love seeing dinosaur behavior in these movies, and to see the compies instinctively get very quiet. You know, like normal animals do when they know that there's a predator around. They get quiet and they hunker down and they try not to draw any attention to them. But I really wish we could have seen that. For all of you at home that have a Lost World Jurassic Park Bull T-Rex toy, you know that that toy came with an action figure inside of a cage, right? And the idea was that the T-Rex would eat the cage and you could get the cage out of the T-Rex's stomach. Well, that's based on an early scene that was cut from the movie where the life pod that Arby was going to get in the novel, where the raptors pull him away, it was adapted for Roland Timbo. And what happens is the T-Rex is coming towards Roland Timbo, he gets in the life pod, and as he does, the T-Rex actually bites onto the cage. And the way they write it is that you're looking from Roland's point of view, like out from the bars, and all you see is teeth, and it throws him like all over the place. It's scary. It's a very cool scene. It's a very Lost World scene where you could just imagine this character stuck in a little position where they could die, but they eventually get away after the T-Rex throws the cage on the ground and goes after the hunters when they're running through the valley. It's pretty intense, and I told you that, and I was like, that sounds like an awesome scene.
I mean, imagine now, but that is so awesome. So I don't understand why they cut it off. That would be so amazing, and people would love that.
Well, it's scary, it's cool, and it got as far as to having, you know, an actual toy made out of it. So I wonder, I don't know why they cut that from the film. Jurassic Park 3, the college student draft. Very little is honestly known about this movie that was being written by Craig Rosenberg in the late 90s. However, what we do know about it is that the story would center around a group of 5 or 6 teenagers who had accidentally become marooned on Isla Sorna. Alan Grant would more than likely return in some sort of starring capacity. Director Joe Johnston has himself stated that while the script wasn't necessarily poorly written, it read like a bad episode of Friends. And he didn't think anyone wanted to watch a movie about a few annoying teenagers stranded on Site B. Still, it's pretty interesting to think how different this would have been from the final movie that got released. Maybe the Kirbys filled in the role for the teenagers in some subsequent drafts. I don't really want to talk about any chaos that was caused by the script being canned 5 weeks out. That being said, what I really want to talk about are some of the mysteries that surrounded the film during its production. Because believe it or not, there is quite a lot of creative ideas that were happening behind the scenes for the third movie that not too many people really know about. Not all of this stuff is 100% fleshed out and documented on the internet just yet. And what we do know comes in the form of mysterious concept art, script descriptions, and people who are working with the movie during its time in production. There's a lot of really incredible ideas that almost made their way into the third movie, and I wanted to dedicate a video to this wild stuff that never got to see the light of day. So back during the Lost World Jurassic Park's production, Steven Spielberg started doing interviews about the future of the franchise. And during this time, he stated that if Lost World was successful enough, there would definitely be a sequel. But he would only come back as an executive producer and not personally direct it. After the movie came out and made a massive amount of money, that sequel was greenlit. However, harsh criticism directed at the second film by fans of the first movie and second novel would lead to some interesting things happening behind the scenes. In 1998, Steven Spielberg came out to publicly say that Michael Crichton, author of both Jurassic Park books, would be returning as screenwriter on Jurassic Park 3, which would soon enter production. However, for reasons that have never been explicitly elaborated on, Michael Crichton would soon leave the project, and new writers would be brought in to work on the film, with Spielberg's initial story idea being Grant going to live on Sorna to study the dinosaurs by himself, although this didn't stick around for too long. And it's here where things get really interesting because the writing process for Jurassic Park 3 involved a number of really fascinating ideas. Some of them are actually available to find on DVD copies of the third film inside of the posters section of the special features. If you dig through this stuff, you'll find an assortment of different concept posters that were being designed during the movie's production. And a lot of the early ideas happen to be listed under a title that was calling itself Jurassic Park 3 Extinction. And the movie's tagline back then was going to be Survival of the Fittest. This is the first mysterious story that I really want to discuss. I've been hearing rumors and getting interesting bits of information about the Extinction script for a long while now. And after talking with Chris Pugh from Jurassic Outpost about the story ideas, he reached out to Jack De La Mare, whose obsession with JP3's production has helped him pick up a lot of interesting story info. Apparently, the info that I was hearing was correct. And the JP3 Extinction story at one point in time would have featured something that Jack himself says was pretty legit. That story would have involved something from Crichton's Lost World novel, the deadly disease known as DX. This disease is responsible for killing off all of the dinosaurs on Isla Sorna, which would be an event that was alluded to in Fallen Kingdom many years later, although through very different means. From what I can gather, this disease would be discovered by researchers on the island in the third movie, and after finding out about how deadly it could be to the dinosaurs, these people would soon learn that the disease could actually be transferred to humans, which would help explain the fetus that we see in the Extinction logos. Now, in my personal opinion, that is a very Jurassic Park sounding story, and in fact, that screenplay is something that I want to get my hands on ASAP. Unfortunately for me, I still haven't found it out there in the wild just yet. Now, other concept posters that were drawn up during this time of production featured the JP logo in the form of an egg, along with a few other riffs on the human death involvement for that film's plot. I'm not too certain whether or not this screenplay would have been the same one that Joe Johnston has brought up in the past, which was another version of JP3 that involved two planes flying over the ocean and one of them crashing on the island. Either way, I still find this mysterious stuff super interesting. Now, after this screenplay was abandoned, there was of course the version that was tossed 5 weeks before filming. This particular screenplay was more than likely Jurassic Park Breakout, which was the story of investigations being carried out on the mainland after an elusive set of dinosaurs had gotten off of the island and started killing people in Costa Rica. While all of that was happening, another team of people would have been on Site B trying to look for clues as to what was going on. From what I've been able to find out, this was the original intended version of JP3 that they casted all of the actors for and designed the movie around. This version was going to include the quilled raptors, the Spinosaurus, the aviary, and a lot of the other stuff that made it into the final film. But all of that was just going to be one side of the full story. We still would have gotten the pteranodons killing people on the mainland plot, with a mystery/suspense story running alongside the Site B stuff. But even way before any of that stuff went down, there was still a ton of other things that were being designed and conceptualized for Jurassic Park 3 that we would unfortunately never get to see. A different red Velociraptor design ended up not being filmed, and a moment where Alan Grant finds a motorcycle to escape from a pack of Velociraptors also got cut from the script. Many of you probably already know that the Spinosaurus was originally going to be a Baryonyx, but you might not know about the moment in the Embryonics administration where Grant and the others were supposed to come across a large tank of Mosasaurs. How they were still being kept alive, I have absolutely no idea. But maybe this cloning stuff would have been fleshed out further with the other line of dialogue about the Spinosaurus not being on InGen's list. Now, another big change that happened during production was actually making the island that's featured in the movie Isla Sorna instead of something called Site C. Now, Site C could very well have been a brand new island that would have been discovered from the company's past, or it may have just been the site from the first Jurassic Park, Isla Nublar. So to put everything into perspective, you originally had Michael Crichton and Steven Spielberg working on the movie directly after The Lost World. Steven's first idea would have been for Grant to have been living on the island and researching the dinosaurs out of his own free will. Later, a script was written for something called Jurassic Park 3 Extinction, which would have involved the DX disease killing off Site B and spreading to humans. After that, a script was put together called Jurassic Park 3 Breakout, which involved the mysterious dinosaur attacks on the mainland. And after that got thrown away, the deadline for JP3's release meant that the filmmakers had to think on their feet, and so they continued making the third movie, despite not having a concrete structure to move forward with. The most complete version of the script that we currently have available is easily found with a quick Google search, and even this version has a lot of differences. It depicts a final battle where Alan Grant uses the Velociraptor resonating chamber to call a pack of raptors to help attack the Spinosaurus while it was trying to kill the others in the boat. And what resulted would have been these smaller pack hunters climbing on top of the apex predator and killing it while the other people escaped. In an interview that Joe Johnston gave a long while back, the director had this to say about JP3's mysterious production. "We never did have a final script. We did not have a final script until after we wrapped the movie. We shot pages that eventually went into the final script, but we didn't have a document. The joke on the set was that it was going to be the wrap gift. Everybody got a script. We had a script for the day we were shooting, and maybe the next day, and sometimes a week ahead of time. But we never had a story that had a beginning, middle, and end while we were making the film. We had to go back to Hawaii to shoot the ending because when we were there the first time, we didn't know what the ending was going to be." I've been searching everywhere for these scripts for quite a few years now. When it comes to the film series, the production of Jurassic Park 3 is the one that fascinates me the most, and it's the one that I find myself constantly interested in. Movies are expensive projects that involve hundreds of people and are created over the course of several years. Tons of different ideas are born and stories told way before the cameras ever start to roll. Whatever the plans may have been behind the scenes, I would absolutely love to get to see them someday, more so than any other Jurassic movie.
For
Jurassic Park 4, has anything happened with that?
Yes, it has. Jurassic Park 4, we have a story I can happily announce right now. We have a writer who is writing the treatment, and hopefully we are going to make Jurassic Park 4 in all of your foreseeable futures, all of our foreseeable futures, hopefully within the next 2 or 3 years.
Now this right here would have been a movie that I think a lot of people would have liked to have seen. Imagine a film where a bunch of compies start causing a lot of trouble on the mainland in Costa Rica. This leads to a team of dinosaur experts going to the island to find out what exactly is causing this to happen. The team would have been led by Ian Malcolm and Alan Grant, and once they get back on Site B, they learn that the dinosaurs were breeding at such a ridiculous rate that it was causing the animals to migrate to other islands and take up new habitats there. The dino experts would have to quickly find a means to stop the animals from eventually overtaking any more land and possibly threatening life on the planet. This movie would have been written by William Monahan and would actually not be directed by Joe Johnston. Steven Spielberg himself once spoke about the story, saying that he absolutely loved it and that he wished it was the third movie instead of the fourth. And I gotta say, I really like this idea. It's simple and it involves yet another trip to Site B, but we get to see Dr. Grant and Dr. Malcolm share the screen again, which is something we haven't seen since the original movie. It also would have involved a believable story that would have played up on the themes that were discussed in the first few films. I really think this could have been a great movie, but sadly, it never came to be. Maybe Jurassic World 3 will help give us something similar in 2021. We're going to talk about something from Jurassic Park's past that has to do with John Hammond. After the release of the first 3 movies, this character was originally supposed to undergo a pretty significant shift in his point of view for the 4th film. And that point of view happened to be his serious dedication to wiping out all of the dinosaurs he'd created on Isla Nublar. So if you've never heard of this information before today, you're probably wondering why exactly the filmmakers chose to change John Hammond after Jurassic Park 3. And you'd be pretty right for questioning that, since at the end of The Lost World, we see John trying to work with the Costa Rican Department of Biological Preserves to protect what's left of Site B's dinosaurs. However, after the events of The Lost World, for some reason, Dr. Hammond was not present in JP3 at all. And we didn't really learn anything new about him, since nothing in that movie was really dedicated to his point of view. Well, that's where the plot of JP4 came into play, in which John Hammond was going to have to deal with the fact that he was the most sued person in the history of planet Earth. It's even in the Guinness Book of World Records in the film. Not the legacy he intended to have, but it was a legacy nonetheless. Now, it's important for me to note at this point in the video that nothing I'm about to go over is official canon. This is all information taken from John Sayles' Jurassic Park 4 script that got leaked online in the early 2000s. None of this really went down in the movie timeline, since this film was never produced. And of course, by the time we get to Jurassic World, we learn that John still wanted to keep his dinosaurs safe even while he was facing death. So the opinions and goals of John in this unmade film do not reflect how the man would have acted later on in the real timeline of the series. With all of that being said, if we dive into that John Sayles script, we can actually see that the world is facing a very real problem after the events of the first 3 movies. At this point in time, dinosaurs are invading the mainlands by migrating through various different means. Pteranodons attack baseball games, compies cause people a lot of problems in neighborhoods, and in general, it's just not looking too good at all. That's where John Hammond's new plan comes into effect. At the beginning of this early script, John contracts a former Navy SEAL by the name of Nick Harris to sneak onto Isla Nublar and acquire something for him. His plan is to create new dinosaurs that he will then unleash upon the old dinosaurs in order to wipe them all out. These new animals would be bred sterile and be without the ability to reproduce whatsoever, but they'd also be highly aggressive females that would bait males in of the same species, and then they'd kill them. John Hammond calls it a Judas strain that he'd like to introduce to the world. But you see, the United Nations have already laughed at his proposal to create new dinosaurs in order to kill the old ones. And they've outlawed the further cloning of any new species since the fall of Jurassic Park went public. And that's why John Hammond needed Nick Harris. You see, most of Isla Nublar's dinosaurs had been wiped out, but there still remained a good population on the island that had continued to survive on their own ever since 1993. A rival company of engines, this time called the Grendel Corporation, had taken over the island and were using it as a sort of messed up base of operations. John Hammond believes these people to be the same guys who contracted Nedry to steal the embryos in the first movie. Speaking of which, Nick Harris's job was to actually make his way onto Isla Nublar, find the Barbasol can that Nedry had left behind, and then make his way back to John so that Hammond could clone new animals with whatever genetic material may be salvageable from the can. The script was described as much more in line with Mission Impossible than Jurassic Park, and at this point in time, the filmmakers were trying to find a way that they could breathe new life into the franchise, since JP3 earned way less money than they wanted it to, and both that film and The Lost World ended up disappointing a lot of fans of the first movie. Now, aspects of this script have been adapted and toned down considerably in the new Jurassic World trilogy, particularly Nick Harris and his slow evolution into the animal behaviorist we know as Owen Grady. However, most of the really crazy stuff from this draft was left behind in 2004, particularly the subject of today's video, John Hammond's insane idea to kill all of his dinosaurs. Now, I don't think I really have to tell you guys that I personally disagree with this goal that they had in store for Hammond. I think I've made that pretty clear already, that I think it's a little too out of character for him to even think about. And when you combine his attempt to wipe out all of his dinosaurs with the insane idea to breed new dinosaurs that will be sterile and fight off the old ones, well, it just seems to be a little over the top for me. Still, this was in fact an idea that they were thinking about going through with in the early 2000s. Everything that we've gone over in this video is indeed 100% real and legitimate. At one point in time, this was going to be Jurassic Park 4. But as fate would have it, things changed. And over 10 years later, Jurassic World would come out instead. Now, I'm curious to hear what all of you guys think about this abandoned plotline for Dr. John Hammond. What do you think the audience reaction would be to JP4 if this had been the plot, and what would you personally have thought about it if it had been released? Unfortunately, Nublar is now controlled by the evil Grendel Corporation, who have taken over the island and cloned their own batch of new Deinonychus, which actually follow human commands. These dinosaurs were engineered to do so by splicing together canine and human DNA into their genetic codes. This team of raptors would come with their own unique names based around ancient Greek heroes as well, namely Perseus, Orestes, Hector, Spartacus, and Achilles. Now, eventually something of course goes horribly wrong, but not before the Greek raptors, 2 spitting Dilophosaurs, and an armored Ankylosaurus parachute out of the sky onto enemy territory and do battle with a ton of bad guys. This was possibly one of the most ridiculous and outlandish stories that was ever even entertained in the film series, and I'm kind of surprised that they ever even planned on doing something so wild. Nevertheless, even though this script was complete and delivered to Mr. Spielberg himself, it would ultimately never be made. Probably because the whole thing leaked onto the internet the same year in which it was written. I want to dive into the old Jurassic Park 4 movie that would ultimately never be made. A lot of people don't seem to really know too much about this, and it's kind of become something of a legendary abandoned project that people are a little misinformed on. Now that we're 2 movies into the Jurassic World trilogy, I thought it'd be a good idea to revisit just what exactly was being planned for the series had they continued working on it non-stop and never took the 14-year break that we all had to sit through. So basically, here is everything that we currently know about it, from start to finish. Way back in the mid-2000s, Steven Spielberg was very interested in making a sequel to Jurassic Park 3. This sequel was talked about and discussed for a really long time in various different science fiction and entertainment magazines. And almost every time any news came out about it, it would be radically different information to what everyone was talking about before. During this time, I can remember Googling Jurassic Park 4, hoping for some sort of news to pop up that would fill me in on when exactly this thing was coming out. Oh, if I only knew it would be over a decade for us to get the final movie. Now, during all of this happening, a Jurassic Park 4 screenplay would actually begin to get circulated on the internet, and wow, did it ever reveal what different direction they wanted to take the movie in. The script that everyone got to read and pass around was actually an official project that was written by John Sayles and stolen from Steven Spielberg's email in the 2000s. This version of Jurassic Park 4 would have centered around hybridized Deinonychus with human and dog DNA spliced into them. And basically, these dinosaurs were going to be bred and trained to go fight off terrorists at any place around the globe. Now, even though these dinosaurs were genetically enhanced and trained by the military, it's important to note that this is not the version of the story that would have anything to do with the hybridized dinosaur humans that I'm making this video on. But this script would ultimately be the catalyst for those newer ideas. Now, sometime after that script got leaked, Carlos Huante, the incredibly talented and popular concept artist that has worked on such films as the Men in Black movies, X-Men, and Alien Covenant, as well as many others, actually got to work on the newest iteration of Jurassic Park 4. Now, it's important to note that in this version of the film, there wasn't ever any studio involvement or really any script to speak of whatsoever, and in fact, this was just kind of an experiment. Unfortunately, someone actually stole Carlos Huante's work some while ago and posted it on the internet without his permission, saying that it was work from the official film, when in reality, some of the images he was just doing for fun, like this particular picture of a cross between a dinosaur and a human. Now, eventually, a lot of the artwork that got made would make its way to the internet, and the media would have a field day with it. I can remember hearing rumors about the dinosaur-human hybrid storyline that everyone was working on in the 2000s, and, well, let's just say the environment for fandoms was very different back then. You see, it wasn't anger or rage or a massive amount of hatred that erupted from Jurassic Park fans around the time of these rumors coming out, and in all honesty, the reaction was purely fear. I have honestly never before heard Jurassic Park fans say that they wanted this to be JP4, and I myself and a lot of other people were genuinely afraid that this was the direction they were going to take the series in. Now, that's not to say that we didn't like the artwork. In fact, I can remember a ton of people really thinking that these designs were absolutely awesome and something that they'd love to see, but, and this is the big but, nobody wanted it to have anything to do with Jurassic Park 4. Now, as time went by, we'd kind of learned that this was a retooled concept of that script with the Deinonychus trained to take out terrorists, and that's where I'm going to assume a lot of the direction came from. Although I'm still confused as to why a raptor man with a gun for an arm exists. I don't know where that came from. A lot of this stuff looked a lot like Ang Lee's Hulk, especially when you compare the Triceratops man that was getting circulated, and it's not too easy to figure out why people were so afraid. Eventually, this would all get dropped for something far more traditional, to say the least. In all honesty, the reason I've avoided talking about the different concepts for Jurassic Park 4 for so long is because they were quite literally all over the place, and a lot of them were so far removed from the series that it became almost unrecognizable, to tell you the truth. And for me personally, I actually wanted some of the human dinosaur hybrid stuff to get its own separate, unique movie that didn't have anything to do with the Jurassic Park brand. It's a topic that's become really muddled by a lot of websites and publications, and the whole time period around the development of the fourth Jurassic is just absolutely insane, to say the least. But yes, this was something that they were working on and something that could have been a movie. Anyways, guys, that is pretty much the whole story behind these human dinosaur hybrid images and what they were being made for around this time. I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on this project, as well as the time period if you were old enough to remember what it was like waiting for the fourth movie. The road to Jurassic World was paved with tons of canceled Jurassic movies that were in various stages of development behind the scenes. However, after a long period in time, it really looked like this fourth Jurassic Park movie may never actually come out. I know that for me personally, I said to myself that if they don't actually have anything they're working on at the beginning of the 2010s, then I'm just going to give up hope on anything ever happening. Well, lo and behold, not too long after that, Steven Spielberg himself actually made a pretty big announcement in relation to Jurassic Park 4. Specifically that he'd actually been actively working on it and that the movie would be due out to release in just a couple of years' time. Soon after, a screenwriter by the name of Mark Protasevich was actually revealed to have been working with Spielberg on developing the film, one that would bring the franchise back from the dead and totally revitalize its life in front of the global audience. This version of Jurassic Park 4, of course, never made it to the big screen, and in his own words, none of what Mark Protasevich brought to the table was used. By the time Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver showed up to work on the movie, it was a completely different beast. Now, this leaves a lot of questions that are just begging to be answered about the work Mark Protasevich did on JP4, because it's essentially a story that never really got shown off in the sequel. Now, at the time, Kathleen Kennedy was actually interviewed and asked about the current status of JP4 around the time Mark left the project, and despite Protasevich stating that he'd written 2 story treatments for the film, both Spielberg and Kennedy had ultimately stated that they decided to go in another direction. Steven was hoping on getting someone on board to Jurassic before he went off to make Lincoln, but ultimately that just didn't happen. Now, what did happen around this time was actually a wide variety of dinosaur and Jurassic Park related projects that were connected with either the Jurassic IP or Steven Spielberg himself. 2011 saw the release of the single-season show Terra Nova that the director executive produced, and Telltale's Jurassic Park the Game came out shortly after to some pretty mixed reviews. Hasbro also made a point of putting out brand new Jurassic Park dinosaur toys at the time. However, their release was notably staggered and kind of all over the place. It's believed by some that this early toy line was actually supposed to help market a new Jurassic movie that was being worked on at the time, which would line up with what Mark Protasevich was working on behind the scenes back then as well. Of course, that whole toy line eventually got mixed up with G.I. Joe, and it just got really weird after that. Now, as for the actual content and plot of Mark Protasevich's version of Jurassic Park 4, I think many of the core ideas that Steven Spielberg had wanted to be used in that movie actually weren't thought out just yet. From the open theme park, to the guy training raptors, to the big bad dinosaur that would tear it all down. From what I've heard surrounding this project, the goal of this movie may have actually featured a team of engine people coming onto Isla Nublar and actually taking back the island from the dinosaurs in order to build a new theme park. This is also kind of the plot of that Jurassic Park arcade game from 2015, only a giant volcano was integrated into that and you're trying to save the animals. So it's slightly different. If we go back even further to the pitch trailer with the Quetzalcoatlus that actually kicked off this new era of Jurassic development, the entire goal of the new series of movies was to move the dinosaurs off of the islands and get them onto the mainland. And if what I've heard is to be believed, or at the very least entertained, it looks like at some point in time, the idea was to actually kick the trilogy off with a team of guys catching dinosaurs on Nublar before the new park was even opened. Which I guess could have been in the sequel, but hey, this is getting way too speculative when we don't have any tangible proof to back it up. I guess in summary, what Mark Protasevich brought to the table for Jurassic Park 4 is something of a mystery at this given point in time. We don't really have any concrete stuff to tell us what exactly it was about. However, we do know way more about what happened after. And since Mark says himself that none of what he wrote was integrated into Jurassic World, it just leaves me as a fan wondering what exactly his story treatments looked like back then. Anyways guys, that's pretty much all we know. This is a Jurassic movie that's far away from John Sayles' script, while still being relatively ahead of what Colin Trevorrow would bring to the franchise a few years later. It's in a very weird point in the series' history that I don't actually see get talked about too much, but I thought this info would be interesting enough to share with you all today. So, what do all of you guys think? What do you think about the development of Mark Protasevich's script for JP4? What do you think the movie actually could have been about? And why do you think they ultimately chose the Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver version to take over this? Personally, I think that any ideas revolving actually catching dinosaurs on Nublar before a new theme park would have been too similar to The Lost World, but I also don't even know if these script ideas are even true. I believe they are, but at the end of the day, we don't have any proof to back it up. A very long time after that, Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver were approached to write a screenplay for Jurassic Park 4. This movie was originally supposed to be directed by J.A. Bayona before he declined due to scheduling conflicts and needing time to prep for the film itself. He'd eventually come back around to make Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom though in 2018. Now, as far as this early version of JP4 goes, the writers were instructed by Steven Spielberg to include 3 central ideas. Number 1, a fully functional theme park. Number 2, a raptor trainer that had a close relationship with the animals. And number 3, a brand new dinosaur that was bigger and badder than the T-Rex. So these writers went to work and crafted what very well could have been the franchise's 4th installment. And boy, was it ever something different. So the story of this Jurassic Park 4 starts off with a character named Vance. He was parachuting out of a helicopter with a pack of raptors on a military raid of a drug dealer's compound in Colombia. That alone should set a very different tone and describe what kind of direction the movie almost went in. In this version of the story, a lot of things happen to have been held over from the infamous John Sayles script that I talked about from the early 2000s, and the incorporation of a military man going on missions to kill drug lords with his pack of raptors is obviously taken from that old idea. Another aspect of Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver's script would have included the antagonizing character of Whitney, who was a female manager on the corporate side of the island who constantly put up red tape that would prevent Vance's work in Jurassic Park. This woman would ultimately become Claire Deering in the Colin Trevorrow and Derek Connolly rewrite, where she was elevated from being an antagonist that apparently was only in a couple of scenes to a protagonist whose character arc would actually be the central focus of Jurassic World. So already, we've got a couple of major major changes that can be easily cited between these stories. But where things get really interesting is in the actual action that kicks off the story for Jurassic Park 4 that they were about to shoot back then, might I add. Because this movie would have featured a Chinese paleontologist who'd brought her 2 young sons to Jurassic Park. She'd gone there because the DNA of a dinosaur she'd recently discovered had been stolen by some unknown person. Now, this dinosaur was going to be the monstrous Malyosaurus, which is a fictional creation that bears no real representation in the fossil record whatsoever. The dinosaur would have been designed to be something of a cross between a Spinosaurus and a T-Rex with a weird nasal crest. It looked more kaiju than dinosaur, but hey, it also looked really cool, so you gotta give the creature design a lot of props for making something look so interesting. Now, the production behind this movie got so far along that a map of Isla Nublar was actually designed, with a lot of areas that were marked as being major scenes that take place in the film. And it's from here that we can actually get a lot of insight into some of the action scenes that were going to be featured in the movie. From here we can gather that the 2 young boys were going to be named Nick and Tim, and at some point they apparently got lost and had to be picked up by a group of hunters who'd made their way up towards the volcanic part of the island. A stampede appears to take place somewhere near the, quote, T-Rex Badlands. A scene where the pteranodons would have attacked the monorail is documented here, and I don't quite understand what's going on right here, but somehow there would be a Mosasaurus attack in the middle of the jungle? Unless this is for a Moosaurus, or maybe the Malyosaurus just abbreviated? I don't really know what to think about that. Another point of this film would have actually been the big differences between the raptor hunt, where the animals get released to go take on the big bad dino. Since the Malyosaurus is not a genetic hybrid, and since it doesn't have any velociraptor DNA, the raptors actually do not turn on the Indian hunters in this story. From my understanding, the portrayal of the raptors in Jurassic World was a very big point that Colin Trevorrow wanted to make in the final film in order to really hammer home the idea that human beings cannot control the raptors, and that they were actually creatures of their own free will more than tamed pets. Speaking of which, this version of Jurassic Park 4 actually lists the raptor paddock as the Raptor Theater, where they would presumably have performed tricks to park guests in an attending audience. Now, even though the raptors don't turn on the humans in this version, they do somehow manage to attack a herd of stegosaurs for some unknown reason. Also, you will note that this is the version of the film where the lead raptor was named Red instead of Blue. And Red, which I've done a video previously before in the past, was designed like one of the male variants from Jurassic Park 3. Apart from that, all I know for certain is that the raptors would have been released much earlier in JP4, around the midway point in the movie in fact, which means half of it would have been the operational park, and the other half would have been the raptors looking for the Malyosaurus in the jungle. Obviously, there were other things that were very different about this script, but from here on out, all we can really do is speculate without actually reading the screenplay. To put things into normal speaking terms, this was a very different version of Jurassic Park 4 that dealt with a lot of ideas that aren't really present in Jurassic World. Steven Spielberg's 3 core ideas are present in each version, but what was going on here is quite removed from what we eventually got. I like to think of this script as a blend between the John Sayles draft of JP4 and Colin Trevorrow's Jurassic World. This was a much more pro-dino weaponization story that, again, started with Vance parachuting out of a helicopter with his raptors on a mission to kill a drug lord. It may be based in a theme park and have a raptor hunt in its story in a similar vein to what Jurassic World ended up doing, but the introduction of a completely fake dinosaur that they made up for no other reason than to have something bigger than the T-Rex doesn't really sit well with me as a JP fan. When Jurassic World did that, they introduced the Indominus Rex as a meta-critique of why corporations shouldn't always go for the bigger and badder next thing. That's why the T-Rex and the Velociraptor take it down in the final act of the movie. It's a symbolic rejection of that very idea. Plus, the whole hybrid angle had a basis in previous stories that Jurassic Park had dealt with before, and it even used Michael Crichton dialogue from the novel for Dr. Henry Wu, who, by the way, was not in this version of the movie. With all of that being said, I have to say that my favorite things from this script are definitely the design of the Malyosaurus, the layout of Isla Nublar, which, by the way, is partially responsible for why the lagoon is in the wrong place in Fallen Kingdom, and the idea of raptors fighting stegosaurs. I don't know why, but I've always thought that would be a really cool sight to see. I wanted to talk about something that comes directly from Jurassic Outpost. This is an outline of events that was apparently supposed to happen early on during the development of Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, which was originally under the title of Ancient Futures. Now, around this time frame, I was actually just first getting into making YouTube videos, and I remember covering a lot of the promotional material and interviews that Colin Trevorrow and Jeff Goldblum and everyone else would give on the highly anticipated sequel to Jurassic World. Well, sometime around the release of Fallen Kingdom, Outpost would actually go over a version of the film that differed greatly from what we got in the final cut. And I think one of the things that people will find made this draft very interesting was the much larger incorporation of Ian Malcolm. Now, early on, the idea is said to have not only been for a single ship, like in the final movie, to take dinosaurs off of Isla Nublar, but for there to actually be another ship to be set in place to take the dinosaurs to Isla Sorna. Now, this boat was apparently going to have none other than the good Klayton himself on board for the voyage. And apparently, just like what we saw go down in The Lost World, he was openly opposed to taking the dinosaurs off of the island and would go out of his way to sabotaging the ship in order to prevent the dinosaurs from going anywhere. One of the other interesting moments of this apparent draft that they talked about would have included flashback sequences with Dr. Wu that I can only assume would have something to do with the original Jurassic Park, but for whatever reason, this would all change. I do know for a fact, though, that the rumor on how Benjamin Lockwood would have been killed in this different version did actually make its way into the junior novelization for the film, in which Eli Mills kills John Hammond's business partner by giving the old man a lethal dose of morphine through his medical IV, instead of, smothering him with a pillow like we see in the final film. Now, I have heard of other versions of the early Fallen Kingdom drafts where apparently the 1993 T-Rex and even Blue the Velociraptor would end up safely being relocated to Isla Sorna. However, these ideas sound borderline cheesy to me personally, since they also come with the rumors that Blue would join a totally foreign pack of raptors, and even the original T-Rex would also meet up with a family of Tyrannosaurs on Site B, which I can only assume may have been something alluding to the group from The Lost World. Now, the big reason for some of these changes to have taken place seem to have come all the way from the top by none other than Steven Spielberg himself, who eventually got into the storytelling process and decided that sending the dinosaurs to London, which is where the filmmakers were originally going to take them, I've talked about this before in the past, and reorganizing the plot to actually take the dinosaurs to California, which is way closer to Costa Rica anyways, was bound to be the best decision for the franchise going forward. Now, there isn't really too much else that we know about when it comes to regarding the actual plot of the early Fallen Kingdom versions. However, there was a lot of other stuff that did wind up getting changed once J.A. Bayona came on board to the project. These ideas would include the entire opening, which was drawn up by the director once he was hired for the job. Originally, Fallen Kingdom just opened with Ian Malcolm in the courtroom, the blood transfusion scene with the T-Rex, which he had to pitch to both Colin Trevorrow and Steven Spielberg before production began, and of course the altering of the dinosaur auction, which originally was supposed to be a full-on sale with set prices. Colin Trevorrow has gone on record to say that he initially wrote this scene as a much more seedy and dark animal trafficking tone that would eventually change once filming had begun. Now, I do also know that the actual clone reveal that happens in this movie was supposed to be radically different to what we get in the final version, and if I had to guess, this would have something to do with that deleted scene that you can find in the second trailer for the movie, where that single mansion guard gets taken out by the Indoraptor, because this whole scene would later be replaced by Mills delivering the clone reveal with an additional 2 mercenaries who would get killed in the final cut. From what I understand, when they made the decision to cut out Iris's death scene, they had to rearrange some stuff regarding the plot twist, because a dying Iris was supposed to be the one to reveal this information to Claire via that leather book that Lockwood had kept with him during the course of the movie. However, since I don't actually have the full script and only have like half a page, I'm not going to really go out of my way to say that this was the original intention during production, but if I had to bet on it, I'm pretty sure there was very little reshoots on the movie, and it would have been this single thing, this little reveal of Maisie Lockwood being a clone. I will say though that hopefully in the future, maybe in the art book that Colin Trevorrow and J.A. Bayona have teased to us, we can get even more information on how the filmmakers went about planning the Jurassic World trilogy, and even learn about some of these deleted scenes and concepts down the line. It's always fun to go over how these films came to be, and both the Making of the Lost World and Jurassic Park books are full of things like this that you guys should know I personally love to go over whenever I get the chance. Anyways guys, these are just some of the earliest story ideas that we've gotten rumors of hearing being set up for Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. Now, I'd like to hear what all of you guys think on the subject matter. What was your favorite little piece of information that has come out regarding the mysterious origins of the 5th Jurassic film? Whatever they happen to be, I'd love to hear them in the comments down below. Now before I go, I want to thank everyone that's helped me build my channel over the years. I'd also like to thank every one of you guys who've watched my stuff. You've all been extremely cool to me. If you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate a like and hope that you'll consider subscribing. God bless you all, Christ is King, see you guys in the next video, and as always, take it easy.